And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to the Wisconsin Submerged History Podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Baylod, the president of the WUAA, and I'm very pleased to have as our guest Dr. Michelle Damian. She is joining our board of directors in WUAA as our new chairperson for our Fieldwork and Projects Committee, something that we've desperately needed. So, welcome aboard, Michelle. Really glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Looking forward to being part of it.
Awesome. So, a little bit of housekeeping. As you all know, WUA has does a few projects every year, and traditionally it's been Kevin Cullen or myself or somebody else that's been responsible for making sure that everybody knows about these projects and that we're doing the necessary documentation and filing a PLP permit with the state. And so, Michelle has graciously agreed to help me out with that. And so Kevin and I aren't going to be doing that anymore. And Michelle is a real archaeologist, unlike me, who is an avocationalist. So Michelle's got quite an interesting background, and I really appreciate her agreeing to come on. You're going to hear about some aspects of underwater archaeology that are, something that most of us are not going to have heard of before. That are really interesting. Um, all right, a few other pieces of housekeeping. Don't forget, everybody, less than a month from now is the Wisconsin Underwater Archaeology Association Fall Symposium. It is our 19th annual. Um, this year, it's a little different. For the last few years, we've had it at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. This year, it's going to be in Milwaukee at the Midwest Archaeology Conference. And we have our own big room there at the MAC. And we're going to have, it'll be just like our former symposia, with the exception that we will be part of the larger event. And so we can have anybody from the Midwest Archaeology Conference, real archaeologists, can come in and see our presentations. So it's a good opportunity for us to get some more exposure. The flyer for the event will be coming out soon with hotel information and parking information. So mark your calendars. Saturday, October 19th in Milwaukee is our 19th annual Fall Symposium. You won't want to miss it. We've got some excellent presenters. All right. Well, why don't we get rolling? So, again, Michelle, thank you so much for doing this. Generally when we have this podcast, the format is that we get to know somebody that we haven't maybe met before, and learn some new things about underwater archaeology. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn myself off and show Michelle's slides. So Michelle, as I said, you're a real archaeologist, with you know, really excellent academic background in archaeology. Um, Tell us a little bit about your background. How'd you get interested in this? And and most of all, tell us about your focus. It really is interesting to me how you got interested in that.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a convoluted story, so I'll try and do my best to make a long story short. The picture that we have up here is of a pagoda, part of a temple called Kojoji on an island in Japan. And Japan has really been my major through line throughout my academic career. So the first time I went to Japan, I was about 15 years old, and I did a homestay with a family in a city called Nagoya, which was it was wonderful. They were fantastic people. I'm still in touch with them more years later than I care to admit, and that really became the focus for me in a lot of ways. And so after I majored in Asian studies in undergrad, I went to Japan after that and worked there for about 7 years, doing nothing archaeology related at this point, by the way. But I did not know where eventually my career was going to take me. But when I came back to the States, I knew I wanted to keep doing something related to Japan, tell other people about Japan. I wasn't entirely sure at that point that I wanted to do it in the classroom. Ultimately, that's what ended up happening. But I started off doing a degree in museum studies. So I was at George Washington University in the DC area. And while I was doing that degree, two things happened kind of simultaneously. I had the great good fortune to be able to do an internship at what was then the Freer and Sackler Art Galleries, what's now the National Museum of Asian Art, and it was a phenomenal experience, and I learned a ton. And one of the things that I learned was that I did not have quite the same passion about the Japanese artwork that some of the folks there did. And so that's also good to know when you're learning about yourself and
Sure.
your career. And at the same time, I was already a scuba diver, and I was bluntly, I was trying to get to know people in DC. I didn't know anybody there. And so I went to a meeting of a local dive club and sat next to a gentleman that we were chatting. And he said, "Oh, if you're doing museum studies, you must like history, you're a diver, you might be interested in maritime archaeology." And I said, "What is that? That sounds pretty cool." And so he had just finished a class with the MAHS, the Maritime Archaeological and Historical Society, which is kind of similar to WUAA in some ways. They're an avocational group located in DC that they do training classes, just an intro to maritime archaeology training class. And I took part in that class. And the first field school that I was ever involved with, I promise you this is a real name. The site was called Tippity Witchity in Maryland.
Ooh.
So guys, kind of sounds like a fairy tale. Tippity Witchity in Maryland. But it was a river site, a kind of riverine site. It was black water, couldn't really see anything. There were jellyfish everywhere because it was brackish water and everybody was getting stung. And I came up from those dives thinking, this is the coolest thing that I have ever done. How do I keep doing this?
Wow.
Yeah. But I didn't want to give up Japan. Japan had been, part of my life for so long that I was like, okay, how can I do Japanese maritime archaeology? And so at that point in time, there was nowhere in the world that you could do an advanced degree in Japanese maritime archaeology. So what I ended up doing was to go to East Carolina University, got my master's in maritime archaeology there, and then I went to a PhD program at University of Southern California that was in the history department, but was amenable to my using archaeological techniques and ideas within my studies there. So Japan has stayed the constant throughout. This is actually a picture of the island that I lived on for a couple of years in between undergrad and grad, but then I did go back to it during some of my PhD work. You see, it's a maritime site, so I was looking at some of the cultural landscape in that area.
So how did you finally come back up here and start to see the Great Lakes underwater archaeology?
Yeah, so the Great Lakes is the first time I did some diving in the Great Lakes, and that was the first field school that I did at ECU. We came up here. We were in Two Rivers. We were mapping the Continental. If you see the signage in Raleigh Point that has the map of the Continental, that was me and my cohort. I am very cold, get very cold very easily, and this was May. The water was 42 degrees, so that was
Ooh.
fun. We only had a limited amount of dry suits for the field school, and the idea was that we were going to kind of share them and alternate throughout the field season. And the first time I dove wet, I came up blue, and the dive safety officer said, "You get a dry suit for the entire time." So I was grateful for that. But yeah, so that was my first professional training field school. Was up here. Little did I know that, again, many years later, I was eventually going to wind up here. But so I finished the PhD and I started looking for teaching jobs. And I did a 1-year postdoc at Harvard. And then I had a little over 5 years at a place called Monmouth College in Illinois. I had a brief stint at Pacific University in Oregon. And then 2.5 years ago, I just started my 3rd year here at UW-Whitewater. And so I'm in the history department. I teach a variety of things of Asian history and our global history class, world 20th century global history, and then I'm also happily teaching an intro to maritime archaeology class here. So I'm teaching that class this semester, and on Saturday I'm bringing my students up to the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. We're going to be working up with them and doing some research on some of the artifacts there. So they're
Very
very
cool.
excited about that.
Excellent. Did you say that you were originally from the Great Lakes area?
I was born in Buffalo,
Okay,
so that side of the Great Lakes.
gotcha. Yeah, we just were there actually for the Aglama AGL
Oh,
Marines
sure.
conference, and quite a maritime museum they've got there, and a lot of obviously a lot of shipwrecks. But
Yeah.
so you ended up, deciding to pursue not just a master's degree, but also a PhD. What can you tell us a little bit more about what the subject was, or how you decided to pursue that level of education?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about the master's at work, and then a little bit about the PhD work. What you have pictured here, this is kind of some of the marriage of my master's work and the in maritime archaeology and the museum work. One of the other happy things that came out of my time in DC was I started volunteering with the Museum of Underwater Archaeology, pictured here, the MUA.org, and that is a online only museum that is highlighting maritime archaeology projects throughout the world, avocationals, students, professionals. There's various exhibits on the MUA, and what you have here is one of our first attempts at doing something we call the field journal, highlighting usually students, and sometimes it's a full field school, sometimes it's an individual student like you have me here, and kind of going through whatever field work they're in at the moment. So for my master's work, I was looking at Japanese woodblock prints and trying to get a sense of Japanese ship construction techniques through the woodblock prints. Very little at that point had been written in English about such things, and so the woodblock prints are a really, really rich artistic source. So I traced that master's thesis journey on the MUA to do a little bit of public outreach along with this too. One of the things that I really strongly believe about any maritime archaeological project is that there's got to be a public presence with it. You can find and discover the coolest thing in the world, and if people don't know about it and if it's not accessible, then it's not enough. So this was my attempt at doing that with the master's thesis. Um, and I've continued to work with the MUA. Again, no training is ever wasted. So all of my master's work doing the museum studies degree is manifesting with this too. And we've been shifting a little bit more. We do a lot with what's called the Asia Pacific Conference on Underwater Cultural Heritage. We maintain a database of the proceedings from that conference. There's about 300 articles there about all kinds of field work happening in the Asia Pacific region, if anybody's interested in that. But yeah, so the decision to go further on to the PhD was ultimately, I did decide that, yeah, I do want to teach in the classroom, and I do want to continue to do research on this stuff. And so after having gotten the tools of how to do maritime archaeology at ECU, like I said, I found a place that would be amenable to my using those techniques and those ideas that went on to do the PhD. And so that went even further back in time. The master's thesis was hovering around the 1800s, and then yeah, so here is one of the other things I very strongly believe in is experiential archaeology. You go and you do, and you go and you see as much as possible when you're learning about these things. So for the PhD work, I went back to medieval Japan, and I was looking at archaeological evidence, documentary evidence, and I was recreating maritime trading routes in the 1500s. And one of the major products that is being shipped back and forth from the inland sea area in Japan to what is present day Kyoto is salt. Salt is being produced in literally hundreds of tons throughout the inland sea. And so what you have here is a salt flat. One of the amazing things about the inland sea area is the tidal change. At high tide to low tide, there can be 10 to 15 feet of tidal change. And so the people that were there harnessed that power, and you can see the irrigation ditch in the front of the image there. At high tide, the seawater comes up, floods that, and you scoop a bucket of water, good salt water, fling it onto the onto the sand, as you see me doing here. The water will evaporate, the salt crystals will cling to the sand, and you repeat that process a number of times. So eventually you have highly salinated sand. Then you rake up that layer of sand and you wash it off. So you've rinsed the sand away, and now you've got really, really highly salinated water. And you boil down that water, and that's how you get your salt. And
Wow.
this kind of thing is happening all throughout. The inland sea is dotted with islands of all sizes. And so you've got a lot of really great, pretty calm areas to do this kind of salt farming because it takes a long time. And you can see me here just one bucket at a time going along that entire salt flat. It's a lot of manpower needed for this too.
Interesting experiential archaeology. How long did it take you to spread that water there?
Well, happily, there was a bunch of us there, and we were taking turns. So it was more just to get a little bit of a taste of the experience than to actually see the whole thing through from flooding to boiling the water. So it was just got a hint of it.
I have to ask you, Michelle, your level of scholarship, particularly in Japanese history and Japanese maritime archaeology, it must be uncommon for an American scholar to do that. And I have to ask, do you speak and read Japanese?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I
Wow.
should have said that. Yeah. Cumulatively, I've lived in Japan about 9 years, and I've studied Japanese for much longer than that. So yeah, I speak, read, write Japanese.
Wow. As a student of linguistics,
Mhm.
wow, you've got my admiration.
What makes it really fun is to do the medieval stuff. It's another level even beyond regular Japanese. So I usually try and explain it to my students as something like, imagine if English is not your first language and you have to read Shakespeare or even Chaucer, and English is not your first language.
Yeah.
That's part of what I have to do. Um, it's medieval Japanese is quite different from modern Japanese.
We're fortunate here in the Great Lakes that French hasn't changed much since the and so we're able to read some of the original early French accounts of the Great Lakes. Brings to mind something that it came to mind just as we've been talking here. I actually have a book about early book about the history of Japan. I wonder if you are familiar with it. So there was a fairly well-known Jesuit missionary and explorer, I don't call him mission, but explorer here in the Great Lakes region, Father Francis Charlevoix. And Charlevoix, Michigan is named after him. Uh,
Okay.
he came to the Great Lakes in 1722. He was widely considered one of the most learned men in Europe, and he wrote a book called The History of New France, well, a multi-volume book, where he went through the flora, the fauna, the cultural history, um, and not long after that, he went to Japan and he wrote a book in French called The History of Japan, based upon his experiences there. It must have been 17, probably before that, maybe 1710.
Hmm.
I have not an original copy of it,
Mhm.
but in my archives, I have a copy of it. I wondered if you'd ever come across that or heard of it.
I have not, to be perfectly honest. So early 1700s.
It's a Westerner's view. Like
Yeah.
Charlevoix, he did a bunch of these. He did one about like South America. He did, and again, a very learned guy. His books had these beautiful copperplate engraving maps in them of the areas that he visited, and it may be the reason why you wouldn't have seen it is because it's not a Japanese history of Japan. It's sort of an early European viewpoint from a person who I don't think spoke the language.
Yeah, but still 1710.
Yeah,
That is really that's right in the restrictions era, basically the Tokugawa period or the Edo period, where foreigners were pretty largely Westerners. Let me rephrase that. Westerners were pretty largely restricted from coming to Japan. Japan only let one Dutch ship arrive every year in an island off of Nagasaki called Dejima. And one of the reasons for this restrictions was because there was a strong anti-Christianity bent to the Japanese government shogunate at that point in time. So how a Jesuit missionary got there in the late
Up right
1600s, early
now.
1700s to publish that is
Yeah, that's something I've often wondered myself. I'm bringing it up right now just to see if I've got the date right on it. I think I may have the date a little off. Um, oh, I see what it is. In 715, he published his first complete work on the establishment and progress of the Catholic Church in Japan. That's why you haven't seen it.
okay. Okay, yes, that's very different.
Yeah, that's right.
Gotcha.
That's why I got it so cheap too. It
Oh,
must have been a
so
rather short volume, I suppose, too, given the cultural insularity that you mentioned. Short length
yeah.
of
I
time.
mean, there was the so-called Christian century where the Christianity did take hold and flourish quite strongly for a very limited part of time, but period of time. But it definitely was pretty restricted by the 1700s. So.
Gotcha. I'm glad I looked that up because I
Yeah, yeah.
didn't
Good
remember.
to know about though. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting book. It's very rare, probably, to find that sort of a Westerner's view. Because I do believe he visited there,
Mhm.
but I digress. So moving along, you eventually returned or came here to Wisconsin,
Yeah.
back to Wisconsin, I should say, and I'll flip through my slide deck here,
Yeah.
and here we have a well-known site that I think most of our viewers will have seen. Can you tell us a little bit about how things have been since you returned to the Badger State?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been able to teach an intro to maritime archaeology class here. I'm teaching it for the second time this semester. And this pictured here is the first time I taught this class. We also worked with excuse me, we also worked with the Wisconsin Maritime Museum and went up there for the day, saw some of the artifacts, and on the way back, took a brief detour to Sheboygan to see the Lottie Cooper because I can't actually throw my students in the water. I would like to, but it's an undergraduate class. Nobody has dive certification. So this is the closest thing that they're going to get to see, quote unquote, real live shipwreck kind of thing. We talk about, of course, in class, we talk about ship construction techniques and things like that. So what we have pictured here is just me giving them a pop quiz. Find me a scarf. Find me a knee. But it was, this was a really full circle moment for me because, as I said, my first field school as a profession, being professionally trained through ECU, was here in Wisconsin. We visited the Lottie Cooper that time, and I remember being as impressed by it as a graduate student and thinking, wow, this is so cool to see this all right here. And so to be able to circle around and now bring my students to that same site is not something I had ever expected at that time when I did that field school on the Continental. And it was just really a wonderful experience. And I'm hopeful that maybe someday a couple of these students will remember that and maybe pursue archaeology themselves. We shall see. Time will tell. But it was really, like I said, just a wonderful kind of emotional experience for me to do that.
It is an interesting site. I I remember when they recovered this and from
Mhm.
the lake floor, they were um, you know filling in the area and didn't know what to do with it, and so it was an excellent idea. Unfortunately, it's starting to fall into ill repair, and there is discussion right now about removing this and
Mm.
doing something with it. They're not sure what, but the community is sort of turned on it, I guess, if you will.
Oh,
They consider it an eyesore now.
oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, and it's not on the National Register of Historic Places because it's been moved, and so the conventional wisdom is that it's not long for this world in that
Yeah.
position. So it is something that maybe we as WUAA may be able to chime in on and
Yeah.
influence the outcome for the positive. So if you're a WUA member, that's something to keep in mind. Right now, these discussions are going on at Sheboygan about what to do with the Lottie Cooper. So, um, you know, one of the things that I'm sure they wouldn't do, but had they left it on the lake bottom somewhere, it would probably still be in exactly the same condition it was, when they
Yeah.
removed it. So,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that's an option. You hate to see it get, you know, destroyed like the Alvin Clark did.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so anyway, um, so to the future, we have a lot of big opportunities coming up with the WUAA, not just for field work, but for training and for different projects and looking at different things that are underwater. And we're not just, a maritime archaeology outfit. We do inland lakes, inland rivers. We do um, just about every aspect of underwater archaeology as a citizen science organization. So, I guess the doors are wide open as far as projects. We're going to be putting out a call for project suggestions for the membership here. We vote on these at our January meeting to decide which projects we want to do as an organization. So, Michelle, are there any areas of interest that you might want to chat about?
Yes, I mean, I'm looking forward to getting more involved just in general. With my specialty being Asia, I'm not trained in Great Lakes maritime archaeology. I've learned a lot of it through osmosis because my partner does a lot of Great Lakes archaeology, but that's his world, and so I've been learning from him more. But we one of the things that I am interested in trying to do is merge my current location with the Asian research interests. There are indications of colonial trade items that have come from Asia. So they're looking for ways that might be able, and it's not a specific shipwreck site or anything like that I'm looking for, but I'm interested in doing a little bit more about trying to find some of those early ties between the Great Lakes and Asia. I mean, it seems removed at first glance, but then you hear stories of I believe it's Jean Nicolet, who when he arrived in the Wisconsin area, thought that he might be coming to Asia, so got off the boat dressed in Chinese robes so that he could greet the natives. He was sorely mistaken, but there are ties here that I think would be interesting for me to try and explore. So that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to trying to dig a little bit further into in the future.
That is true. I think there's an example of a shipwreck from the 1830s up on the north shore of Lake Michigan, the Milcoquins River wreck, which we've never actually identified. It was the subject of a substantial archaeological dig, and they found, I believe, a case of Chinese tea still with
Mm.
the stamps on it from
Oh,
Asia, from the 1830s
yeah.
on that wreck, and they reburied everything. It's still up
Mm.
there, buried under the beach.
Oh, wow.
But there was a lot of trade goods, I believe. At least that's the extent of my knowledge of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, there were a lot of opportunities, and if there's anything that WUA has a lot of resources now. We're going to be getting our own side scan sonar and our own deep water ROV this year, and so we'll have a lot of capability to do remote sensing, and of course we are always interested in any new sites or projects. So.
That's great.
Well, I think let me go ahead and bring us back up here. All right. So the future holds a lot of interesting stuff, I think, for us in WUA. We have a lot of good projects. We're really happy to have Michelle on board with us as on our board. A couple of housekeeping things. I just want to remind anybody that's tuned in late about our fall symposium that is going to be on Saturday, October 19th in Milwaukee at the Midwest Archaeology Conference. Stay tuned for a flyer about that. We will paper the internet with them as soon as they come out, which I expect will be tomorrow. Still lining up the last speaker. What else is going on? think that's about it. Stay tuned too. Here in a couple of days, I'll be publishing the WUAA monthly member update with a call for project ideas if somebody has a project they want to do, and that will go right to Michelle as our new project committee coordinator. And if you'd like to serve on the project and fieldwork committee, we're looking for members who are interested in serving on those committees. They meet twice a year virtually, so no huge time commitment, but we're interested in your perspective and in your involvement. So consider joining. Michelle, any last minute stuff before we wrap up?
I think I've probably babbled on long enough, so but I appreciate you letting me come on and tell you a little bit more about my background, and I'm looking forward to getting more involved with WUA.
Excellent. Well, it was fascinating because, like I was telling you earlier, so often we have people come on and it's another shipwreck, and they're talking more about the same stuff, and people really like hearing, I think, a little bit more about things that they don't know about and that are new. And Asian and particularly Japanese underwater archaeology is something that is very interesting to us, and there are ties certainly with the Great Lakes. So thank you again, Michelle, for doing this, and welcome aboard. Really glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And stay tuned. I will be announcing our next podcast, who it will be, in the monthly member update in a few days. So, also, this podcast will be rebroadcast on YouTube and uploaded there. So, you can watch it there if you didn't catch the whole thing. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.